Welcome to episode 45 of Engaging Franciscan Wisdom. My name is Sister Michelle Lallier, and I'm happy to introduce our guest host, Darleen Pryds. Welcome, Darleen.
Thanks, Michelle. In today's episode of Engaging Franciscan Wisdom, I'll be talking with Brother Mark Schroeder, who's a Franciscan friar of the St. Barbara province. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, Darleen, and hello, whoever's listening in.
This is the last episode in a series on Franciscan spirituality as a countercultural path. So I'd like to just start by asking you, how did you first become a Franciscan?
It's a unique backdoor way, maybe. When I was at college, I was studying accounting, and one day I was doing my homework, sitting in a desk, staring at the wall, and I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life at a desk. And I said, well, what enlivens me is being out with people and being with the poor, some kind of service. So with that, I went to the first religious order group that I knew about. There was the Jesuits in California. And I applied, and through a lengthy process, I finally started with them. And I don't know how quickly, but I realized as a Jesuit novice, something was missing in this life. Now, this is me judging what I needed, not where they're living. And also, I was 22 years old. So, but I was allowed to look more at the Gospels and Scripture and that good stuff. And also, I saw what the church was about. And I decided to leave the Jesuits after a lot of struggle, interior struggle. And I applied to different religious orders. The first night I left the Jesuits, they had a Catholic magazine, and I filled out all these little cards to the Dominicans and the different Franciscans and Augustinians, mailed them all out, and the Franciscans replied. So I had never met a Franciscan.
Huh.
So the vocation director came to my apartment, and within a year, I was a Franciscan postulant, starting the process.
Wow. So by that point, you were about 23 years old, 23, maybe 20.
24.
Yeah, so still pretty young. What was this interior struggle like? I mean, as such a young man, discerning religious life, that's already pretty countercultural. How many of your peers were doing that?
Well, in the formation programs, since I was at two, most of the guys were really doing soul searching, and we were given time to do that and
Sure.
whatnot. I didn't really have the skills that they developed. In my Jesuit days, when I decided how we dealt with it, was I got stomach aches, couldn't sleep, because I didn't know how to wrestle with discernment and basically say no to something that I had been dreaming about. Well, with some Jesuits helping me, I got through all that. And early on in the Franciscans, it was never really a struggle the first couple of years. So it's just learning about different prayer forms, meditation forms.
Yeah, that's so interesting. These somatic, these physical issues you were having when things just weren't right. Our body tells us, doesn't it?
Right. And that still happens now. In fact, I'm more aware of it. Just listen to what my body's telling me and whatnot.
Yeah, that's interesting. How many people when you were at college, when you were first starting to discern this, how many other guys were thinking of religious life?
When I was in college, I was an loner pretty much.
Mm.
I still lived with my family. I worked I was a guard in a juvenile hall, but it was pretty much a lone discernment. I didn't have a lot of people I bounced stuff off of.
But was there some contact at juvenile hall? What were you doing there?
I was a guard.
And so were you interacting with the kids in juvenile hall, and did that kind of spark your interest in social justice?
Well, it started early off. Just my family was always a- aware of it. My dad was always helping poor people, bringing poor folks home for Thanksgiving and birthdays and Christmas and whatnot.
Hmm.
So that was kind of ingrained in me. The juvenile hall job was an accident. I stumbled upon it. Yeah, but from that, I ended up getting a college degree in criminology. I've been a chaplain and juvenile hall. I've been a police chaplain in 2 cities as well. But to get back to you, getting to know the staff, which was a totally different kind of personnel than little old me, reaching out to people that most people don't want to deal with. I found it was easy for me to deal with in prison settings.
So you didn't have any of those physical issues. What made it easy for you to be there?
I don't know, it feels like it's bragging. I realized I had a talent to be in that kind of situation and to use my words and my body language to get through the day and help in these situations where violence could have sparked up. People told me, well, you must be good at it because other people were like, weren't you scared? Let's like with those kind of people. What do you say to them? And it was pretty natural to me. I did not grow up a wild kid. I was quiet, whatever. So,
Yeah, and I don't hear bragging there. I hear an awareness that there's a gift, and it really is a gift to be aware of a kind of presence that you bring. So there must have been something either innate in you or maybe reared through your childhood that you could bring a presence of passivity, of meaning peace, and maybe also just presence to actually be with people, to listen to them. Am I reading too much into this?
no, you can't see me, but I'm 6 foot tall. And at that time in my life, I was 119 pounds. So I was not a physical threat when I was tall, but in a prison setting, a little skinny guy because it's not a physical threat.
Hmm.
The other thing I just realized, I also taught in a boys' high school and in a girls' high school in my early life, religious life too.
Yeah, not everyone can teach high school.
Yeah, that's one reason I started with the Jesuits. Is I want to be a teacher, and I've been allowed to do that at the different places I've lived at. In Sacramento, there's an elementary school, and we spent a lot of time teaching that.
What did you like about teaching?
I poking kids' minds and just watching somebody kind of open up new thought, new ideas. What I taught was always quote unquote labeled theology, so spiritual things.
Yeah, that's fun to see people kind of open up to a new idea, but also using that idea to really open up their heart, maybe their eyes to the world. What
Right.
kinds of subjects did you cover in those theology classes? Was it social justice or was it, traditional theology?
Well, when I did the high school, it's given the theology book, and so I'd stick to that. But I always did my best to bring in what was happening in the news
Hmm.
and getting not only just to see what was going on, but to reflect on Catholics and Christians. How do we respond? We can respond differently than quote unquote society responds.
So you were inviting them into a countercultural response.
Yeah.
Can we explore that a little bit? What did that mean? I mean, what do you mean in terms of, society expects you to respond to the news in one way, but you were really trying to get them to respond in another? Can we find some kind of maybe concrete example of that?
Well, I just found, especially with the Franciscan label and understanding, to really live out the ideals of St. Francis, 800 years tradition. It's really countercultural. then just to present that to kids or when I end up teaching adults, there's always an alternative, and what we think is, so that's how it's always done, and that's the only way we can do it is below.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of get stuck in habits. I think the Franciscan way can be really raw. It's when we are deeply present with one another. It's not scripted. Nothing is scripted. We have to be really deeply present and be open to what emerges. And that can be scary for people, I think.
Yeah.
I think especially teenagers. I think teenagers are open to that. They are seeking authenticity, and at the same time find comfort in scripted behavior.
Right. Also, as a Franciscan, I know what I've never dreamt, but early on, I was active in nonviolent demonstrations, many times ending up in jail. That's beyond, like I said, the way I was raised and the way I operated when I was a kid. But through that, I really realized the importance of standing up for what you believe, the importance of taking risks. So I would have never dreamt of that. And my whole spiritual quest is always, I believe God invites everybody. So God invited me into each of these situations so I could learn and grow and see how I handled each one. And of course, based on nonviolence, I label it strict nonviolence for my values. And just to realize that, I survived it.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Can you share some of the issues, some of the demonstrations you protested at?
Sure. Well, the first time I was ever arrested was in Lawrence Livermore Lab, which is outside of Oakland,
Mhm.
where the nuclear weapons and other weaponry is being developed. And so it was a Good Friday celebration out there. And that was the first time I ever risked arrest and ended up in, ironically, we were pinned up, locked up in the Japanese concentration camps in Livermore. There still exists, but they still have the buildings, and that's where we were, a gigantic number of people. And so I've always been involved with nuclear weapons, the abolishment of them. I'm still I'm on the board of Nevada Desert Experience. They go out in Nevada to the test site, still risk arrest because of that craziness that goes on out there with the nuclear weapons development and also drones and development and whatnot. When I was younger in Sacramento, we would demonstrate against the Contra with the Central American, if you remember that,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
and death penalty in Sacramento and at San Quentin. So a lot of just standing up in my habit and being nonviolent.
Yeah, and I suspect that your wearing your habit really affected a lot of people. Seeing a Franciscan friar there, probably a few other friars there too.
Right. I don't wear my habit a lot, so I tell people I wear it for prayer and for protest. So,
That's a good thing, I think.
but it is a symbol, man. It was at nighttime at St. Quentin, and you could go in their parking lot. 'Cause, St. Quentin's kind of, near the water lot. I went with one other friar. We get in the parking lot, and we were there when they were going to execute someone. And there was two groups there. One group was the not execute, and surrounding them were these people with bullhorns and signs that says "Do execute."
Mm.
And it was very, very tense. It was other friar was a lot braver than I, and he was older and wiser. He said, "Let's go and stand in between the two of them." So there's two of us in our habits. standing in between the two groups. And it's the most demonstrative for me of just the power of this whole Franciscan tradition. And of course, thanks for God, there was never any violence or anything. And unfortunately, when they executed the guy, then they announced it, and then people went home. So there's
Well, it's a sad ending to a really powerful story there, standing in between two conflicting protesting groups.
that.
I'm sensing my own imagination running in terms of what you might have felt during that time that you were standing in between those groups, but I don't want to presume your experience. What was it like to stand there? There must have been a lot of energy swirling around you.
Well, I never liked any violence. So the words and the signs and the energy from the pro execution group uh, was unsettling,
Mm.
but also I wasn't doing it alone. I think it more hit me once I went home and I realized, hey, you were standing right in the middle of chaos. If it would have blown up.
Yeah, so just one other person helped you. That the two of you became that wall.
I have another little story, you want it?
Yes, absolutely.
This is just embedded in my mind, but I was at the parish church in Sacramento as a friar, and there was this man that would come to church and he would bring signs about anti-abortion and he'd have pictures of fetuses and whatnot. And he would just always be there. And he always wore a suit and tie. It was like out of style. But that was his goal in life. Well, then we went down to the state capitol for a demonstration. It was not about abortion. It was about some other human rights, maybe farm worker rights. But nevertheless, he got too close to the front door of the Capitol with his signs. He was trying to be in the pictures. And the Capitol police were, were grabbing him to arrest him. And he started shouting out, Brother Mark, would you help me? Help me.
Hmm.
So I went over there and talked them down. But he was, the other side, but they were being unfair to him. And he reached out to me. And we always had this little silly bond. When push comes to shove, we're just two humans and we both cared about each other. And that always reminds me of, no one is your enemy. And sometimes I go to a rally or type something on my Facebook page and Mr. Righteous, I know the right answer to that. Maybe I don't.
Yeah.
What's my relationships?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That it's really, we're all in this together,
That's right.
and we might have different ideas, different opinions, but there is something about this Franciscan way of being present to others. But what I'm also hearing you say is being present to yourself, to catching yourself in those times of judgment, to be self-aware.
One has to always be aware of oneself, what's going on. And with that, the only way I can teach about being a Christian is you got to be active, do actions that promote justice and peace and nonviolence. When I'm out of whack, it's not going to work. So that's why I continue to do the best I can to stay focused.
Yeah, so that kind of brings me to another question in terms of using your words. What makes you get out of whack, or what are the biggest challenges that you have for embracing the countercultural path?
Well, I don't think it's just me, but I believe anybody that lives in the United States is an addict.
Mm.
Comes in different forms, but if you live in our consumer culture, there's addictions,
Hmm.
compulsions. So I do my best to stay on top of that. I'm in a 12-step group. It's my 26th year, actually, in 26 years.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I also believe in, quote unquote, with private prayer, daily prayer. It doesn't have to be hyphenated.
Mm.
Mixed in with that is, I believe in exercise, being outside. And for me, I always have to be reading a spiritual book, a modern spiritual book, keep feeding myself with new things, new ideas. I don't know if I answered the question or not.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of moved into the next question, which was what are your forms of support? And I hear that it's through private prayer, which is not necessarily high liturgical prayer, but sounds like it's conversation, very down to earth, exercise and reading. But I'm really taken with this comment that you made that anybody in the United States is really an addict because we live in this consumer driven culture. And to live in a way that's, first of all, aware of all of these consumer pulls, and then to reject those, that for many people is really hard, but it's at the base of your life, I think.
Yeah, and I'm not the best role model, so just to follow me around for a couple of days, they realize I make mistakes too.
Everybody does.
Right.
I know that an important part of your life, and you wrote to me that what takes precedence in your life, even over your ministry, is living in community. Can we talk about that for a little bit?
Sure.
Because living in community is also countercultural, right? And what are the joys and challenges of that? Tell us about your community.
Okay. I'd say for the last 25 years of being a friar, I've been a friar over 40, but I vocalize at meetings and I vocalize around friars that community life, which us friars in the Western U.S. call fraternity. Fraternity is the most important thing we have. I wanted that always in religious life, but I didn't think it was like quote unquote priority. But I've grown to realize that I live with people. I choose to live with people. I choose to interact with them daily. So at the present, I'm living in the largest friary in the province of St. Barbara. And somehow I'm in charge of it, the guardian. I need to vocalize to the friars and to others how important fraternity is. Um, it can be hard sometimes because it's different personalities, and I'm sure it's hard for some other friar to live with me. But in reality, it's just a joy. And it's our theme here is like countercultural, it's for sure. But with it, actually, I don't have really a care in the world.
Mm.
So it's really a spiritual blessing for me to live in community. The hard part for me where I'm living now is because we're so big. I was asked to come here as a guardian. It's in a big institution. I mean, it's gigantic. And I do my best when I live in a house, a real house, but it is what it is.
How many friars are there?
Right now there's 17.
Hmm. Yeah, 17 individuals of different ages, I think, and
Correct.
backgrounds.
Correct. Now, each of them has chosen to live in community too. And that's always fun to point out. Because sometimes we think our way is the best way and whatnot. But if you have 16 other people that say, well, I want to live together too, there is something to living in community. And it's what it is. Right down the block from us, we have a 4-clan monastery.
Mhm.
There's 14 sisters there, maybe. They really live community because they don't ever leave the walls. And it's on a half a block and neighborhood here in Santa Barbara. And that's a different way of living community because they are together, really together. So I'm thankful that St. Francis put it in in our early documents that we got to not stay in the monastery, we got to be out with people.
But let's explore community for a minute, because I lived in an intentional community for a few years when I was a young adult, and it was a multi-generational, multi-family, intentional community. There were children, there were senior citizens, and all ages, and it was a challenge. It was a real challenge, and it took a lot of time to keep the community together. So not that there's a magical way of making community work, but what are some of the tips or suggestions you have or experiences that you have around building a sound community?
Well, prayer together is important.
Hmm.
But prayer has to be enlivening, not just rote and not just because we have to do it. So prayer is important together because it's a countercultural way of relating to each other. Communication is really important. What I've learned here when COVID started was I asked the friars to get together every Wednesday at 4:00. We just talk about our emotions and what's going on because of COVID. And if you remember at the beginning, we all thought we all had to just isolate. And then over time, we learned different ways of being safe. But nevertheless, I told the guys I want to keep that going. So since I've been guardian, we've been meeting every Wednesday at 4:00. And it's a person can verbalize whatever they want to say. They don't have to talk about feelings if they're not in the mood. But I just use a mutual invitation. That's where one person starts and then that person picks the next person. And it just goes through that. But the guys tell me that it's really made us a community. It continues to. So there's that kind of communication. Also, in the friar lifestyle, having meals together is important.
Do you cook the meals?
Presently here, we have a cook 3 nights a week, and then we take turns 3 nights a week. And Saturdays, the guardian goes and buys pizza for everybody. Yeah. One other thing I want to say is important is that I encourage every friar to have a spiritual director and or a therapist as needed. And I always tell them price is no object. But to be in religious life, you can't be making decisions on your own. You have to really keep discerning God's will, not their will. And the fruit of that for me is happier, healthier guys living together.
Yeah, can I just ask kind of a probing question? Because you've raised a couple points in the last, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. You mentioned that you have no care in the world, and just now you've mentioned that there's no price is no option for a therapist and a spiritual director. For many people, price is an issue. And for many people, there are lots of cares in the world in terms of how to make rent and how to afford food. I just want to explore the kinds of privileges that are part of a Franciscan life with you.
Yeah, well, that's always been an issue with me. I think I just accept my reality. The reality is if you live in community life, then you share. With the Franciscans on the West Coast and probably throughout the U.S., people are very generous. So our bank account has some money. We don't build it up. My happiest years of living was living in the barrio in San Diego. But I'm not always privileged to live just simply like that. And one dedicates one life to a cause, and that's the Franciscans, and the leadership says, could you help us here at the mission? And here I am.
Yeah. And that's another kind of letting go of your own desires.
Yeah, we had a friary in Las Vegas. One of the friars there did a lot of work with the homeless, and they were picketing at a casino. Casino was somehow supporting anti-homelessness issues in the city. And he called me and said, I really need you here tomorrow for a demonstration. Can you come? I said, well, okay. So I went, jumped on an airplane and flew to Las Vegas to stand with the homeless at a casino. And I talked to the fellow demonstrators who were homeless. And they said, I'm not comfortable here. I just flew in and I'm going to fly out. And they said, well, that's your problem, but we want you here. We needed you here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's God's humor. And sometimes I waste a lot of energy thinking what people think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And that's something that most of us share. So thanks, Mark. It's always fascinating talking with you. And I'm so grateful that you're willing to share some of your thoughts and some of your experiences to close out this series on Franciscan spirituality as a countercultural path. So thanks, Mark.
you're welcome.
Darleen, thanks to you and your 4 guests, Carmen, Jean-Francois, Athena, and Mark, who were interviewed for these past 4 episodes. Their sharings were rich in substance. I'm grateful to be with you then today as we wrap up this storied journey. You started this series on Franciscan spirituality as a countercultural path several weeks ago. Do you see the subject differently now than when you started?
Oh, thanks for that question, Michelle. One of my first takeaways was that there is a sense of companionship along the way of forging one's path. So I don't know if I sense this differently than when I started, but this sense has really deepened. We are not alone. Instead, we're interdependent, meaning that we depend on one another and we find our way with others along the way. Now, it doesn't mean that we choose identical paths or ways of life, but we touch each other's lives along the way. And in those encounters, we grow deeper into this thing called wisdom. As long as we are open to these encounters. Now, each of the guests, Carmen, Jean-Francois, Athena, and Mark, each of them has cultivated paths of openness to encountering others. I think the second thing I noticed is that they each spoke about encounters with other people more than they did about the natural world. Now, that could be just a function of circumstances by which we talked, but it was something I noticed because we tend to assume Franciscans are going to talk about their encounters with the natural world. But for my friends who spoke with me and shared their stories, it was their encounters with people that were most important.
And thank you for your kind of observations of both of those points. And they both have to do with the sense that we are relational beings and how you were able to tease out this place of deepening. And wisdom is connected to our openness to be interdependent with others. And this very astute insight that here in this case with these 4 people, it was encounters with other persons more than with the natural world. Very interesting. Well, thank you. And would there be any other further message or takeaway, perhaps an invitation or a challenge that you'd like to highlight with our listeners?
Yeah, I think one characteristic or quality that came forward for me listening to each of them was this fearlessness. They each have experienced difficulties, no doubt, but none of them spoke of fear or frankly, even doubt, even as they faced critics or others who expressed doubt about their ventures. I was often reminded when I was speaking with them of what Thomas Merton prayed and wrote. My Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going, do not see the road ahead of me, cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself, and the fact that think I am following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so.
Mhm.
But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you.
Mhm.
And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. This sense of desire of doing God's will, that's what really came forward for me in these conversations. To add just a couple more remarks, neither Carmen nor Jean-Francois nor Athena nor Mark, none of them really knew where they were going.
Mhm.
And in fact, I might even say they might not know where they're going now. They have let go of that need to control things and to be in charge of things.
Mhm.
I wonder if perhaps that's the most countercultural way they embody Franciscan spirituality in this world in which we find ourselves today, in
Wow.
the summer of 2022,
Mhm.
not trying to control.
Mhm.
And finally, at the risk of reducing the depth of these wisdom figures to merely a meme, Brother Mark recently posted something on the Franciscans for Justice site that I'd like to bring forward to close,
Mhm.
because it speaks to me as someone who often voices reservation about decisions taken within organizations. He posted a quote attributed to Mark Twain. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. I'm not going to add my own analysis to that. I just think the quote speaks for itself.
Yep. Yep.
Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect.
Mhm. Wow. And how fitting that is with this theme of countercultural, how deeply affirming that's related, I think, to this fearlessness, the willingness to do God's will, even if we don't know where, and we're committed to not trying to control or manipulate the where. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the, as you say, depth and breadth of your summary reflections, and trust that these journeys will continue for each of them and for whatever they've touched in our own lives in listening to their stories. So once again, I want to thank you, Darleen, for your generosity in bringing us these really valuable conversations that explored Franciscan wisdom for these times. And I wish you and your own life work that you may be abundantly blessed as you continue to go forward in your countercultural way as a teacher, as a companion to people in the beginning of their lives, in the end of their lives, and in the middle of their lives. And just really treasure your friendship and also your astute clarity of perception and ability to articulate it. You're a great gift to our Franciscan family and to people of faith that are on a spiritual quest. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much for your kind words. And thank you for this opportunity to guest host this podcast. It's been a real privilege to have the space to talk with each of these guests. And of course, I'd also like to thank Carmen Barsotti, Jean-Francois Godet-Calagueras, Athena Godet-Calagueras, and Mark Schroeder for their time and for sharing their honest wisdom. So thank you.
Thank you. God bless you. Bye now. And thanks to you, listeners, for tuning in to the podcast today. I invite you back for episode 46, which will be published on October 4th, the feast of St. Francis, and also the beginning of the 3rd year of engaging Franciscan wisdom. Now that is amazing grace. I will interview Franciscan associates Joanne and Gary Dahl, a couple whose marriage has helped them to see life as a gift and to embrace the transformative capacity of love in relationships. Until then, may you be blessed with peace and all good.